Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember. Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook, cover to cover. Please like, please subscribe, please. Textbook, cover to cover. Yesterday we talked about Stalin taking over in Russia. I also got a little bit upset. I was a little irritated. Not so much because of Stalin. I already knew that he was a bad guy. But whatever. That's besides the point. Here we are today. And thank you. I appreciate your listening and your time and your attention. Section 3, Chapter 28. Life in Totalitarian State of Russia. Of Soviet Russia. Setting the scene, from 1930s until his death in 1953, Stalin tried to boost morale and faith in the communist system by making himself a godlike figure. His propaganda mills described him as a devoted father and a Soviet people. Poets wrote hymns of praise to Stalin the Wise and son of Lenin, who was the unsinking sun of our times. This cult of personality was one more pillar to support Stalin's absolute power. How do you do a Russian accent again? Russia. Okay. Marx had predicted that under communism, the state would wither away. The opposite occurred under Stalin. He turned the Soviet Union into a totalitarian state. In this form of government, one-party dictatorship attempts to regulate every aspect of the lives of its citizens. You have already seen, for example, how Stalin imposed central government control over industry and agriculture. Terror. To ensure obedience, Stalin's Communist Party used secret police, censorship, violent purges, and terror. Police spies did not hesitate to open private letters or plant listening devices. Nothing appeared in print without official approval. Grumblers or critics were rounded up and sent to brutal labor camps, where many of them died. Propaganda. Using modern technology, the party bombarded the public with relentless propaganda. Radios and loudspeakers blared into factories and villages. In movie theaters, schools, citizens heard about communist successes and evils of capitalism. Newsreels and newspapers showed bumper harvests and new hydraulic dams opening up, Newsreels and newspapers showed bumper harvests and new hydroelectric dams opening up or proclaiming the misery of workers in capitalist West. Billboards and posters urged workers to meet or exceed production quotas. Stalinist propaganda also revived extreme nationalism. Headlines in the Communist Party newspaper, Pravda, or Truth, linked enemies at home to foreign agents seeking to restore power of the landowners and capitalists. Supporters of Stalin's aims were often glorified as national heroes. For example, the government put up statues honoring a 14-year-old boy who turned his own father over to the secret police for associating with the kulaks. And I think the kulaks, where are the kulaks again? Wealthy peasants. I don't get it. War on religion. In accordance with the ideas of Marx, atheism, or the belief that there is no God, became an official state policy. Early on, the communists targeted Russian Orthodox Church, which had strongly supported the Tsar. The party seized religious property and converted churches into offices and museums. Many priests and other religious leaders were killed or died in prison camps. Other religions were persecuted as well. At one show trial, 15 Roman Catholic priests were charged with counter-revolutionary activities, such as teaching religion to the young. Then the state seized Jewish synagogues and banned them use of Hebrew. Islam was also officially discouraged. However, Muslims living in the Soviet Union generally faced fewer restrictions, partly because the communists hoped to win support among the colonized peoples in the Middle East. The communists replaced religion with their own ideology. Like religion, communist ideology had its own sacred text, the writings of Marx and Lenin, and its own shrines, such as the tomb of Lenin, which they kept him preserved in, like dead but preserved, for 50 years. Portraits of Stalin replaced religious icons in Russian homes. Weird. Like Big Brother in 1984. Changes in Soviet society is a new heading. Did I wear the sunglasses yesterday when I was irritated? Because that's kind of funny if I did. Changes in Soviet society. The communists transformed Russian life. They destroyed the old social order of land-owning nobles at the top and the serfs at the bottom. But instead of creating a society of equals, they promised, they created a society where a few elite groups emerged as the new ruling class. The new elite. At the head of the society were members of the Communist Party. Only a small fraction of the Soviet citizens were allowed to join the party. Many who did were motivated by a desire to get ahead, rather than a belief in communist ideology. The Soviet elite also included industrial managers, military leaders, scientists, and some artists and writers. The elite enjoyed benefits denied to most people. They had the best apartments in the cities and vacation homes in the country. They had vacation homes in the country. They could shop at special stores for scarce consumer goods. Good shoes, noted one Western visitor, distinguished the elite from the common citizen. Social beliefs and drawbacks. Although excluded from party membership, most people did enjoy benefits unknown before the revolution. Free education was offered to all. The state was also providing free medical care, daycare for children, inexpensive housing, and public recreation. While these benefits were real, the standard of living remained low. As elsewhere, industrial growth led millions of people to migrate to cities. Although the state built massive apartment complexes, housing was scarce. Entire families might be packed into a single room. Bread was plentiful, but meat, fresh fish, and other foods were in short supply. Education. After the Russian Revolution, the communists built schools everywhere and required all children to attend. The state supported technical schools and universities as well. Schools served many important goals. Educated workers were needed to build modern industrial state. In addition to basic skills, schools taught communist values, such as atheism, the glory of collective farming, and the love of Stalin. The Communist Party also set up programs for students outside schools. These programs included sports, cultural activities, and political classes to train teenagers for party membership. Sometimes young communists would be sent to help harvest crops or participate in huge parades. So there's the thing that, like in the 80s, there was a KGB defector who spoke to some news guy in America, or maybe in England, and said the Soviets would infiltrate the American society in a slow way by infiltrating their culture. And I'm starting to think like the atheist movement in the United States I saw as a child, where kids the age of 12 were convinced they were atheists, and I thought that was odd as a child, because I don't know how you can make that decision so deeply as a 12-year-old, but that might have been a product of some sort of internal operation that the Soviets put in motion decades past to infiltrate into our society. I'm just talking out loud. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I do think it's odd that little kids thought that there was no God, and they were convinced of it. And it seems like something that the schools in Soviet Russia did teach. They taught atheism. So if you teach atheism, that means that you're giving logic to why atheism works. And, kids in my growing up time had, faulty logic, albeit faulty logic, to explain why they were atheist. Just like people also have faulty logic to explain why they're theist. But where do they get these lines from? Where do they get these logic points for why they're atheists? I'm suggesting that it's potentially, I'm not saying that this is certain, but I'm certainly saying it's potential that they got these ideas from some sort of psyop from the Soviet era Russians infiltrating American culture and society. Women, before 1917, women such as Lenin's wife, Krupskaya, worked for the revolution, spreading radical ideas among peasants and workers. Some urged fellow socialists to pay attention to women's needs. In 1905, Alexandra Kollontai noted how little our party concerned itself with the fate of women and women's liberation. I don't know how to do a Russian accent. I just don't know how to do it. After the revolution, Kollontai became the only high-ranking woman to serve in Lenin's government. She vigorously campaigned for women's rights. Under the communists, women won equality under the law. They gained access to education and a wide range of jobs. By the 1930s, many Soviet women were working in medicine, engineering, and sciences. By their labor, women contributed to the Soviet economic growth. They worked in factories and in construction and on collectives. Within the family, their wages were needed because men earned low salaries. The government provided day nurseries for children. The arts and the state. The arts and the state. The Bolshevik Revolution at first meant greater freedom for Russian artists and writers. Art must preserve politics, Lenin had insisted, but he generally did not interfere with artistic freedom. Artists welcomed the chance to experiment with ideas and forms. Socialist realism. Under Stalin, however, the heavy hand of the state controlled the grip of arts. Stalin forced artists and writers to confront the style called socialist realism. What? That's very interesting sounding. Socialist realism. Its goal was to boost socialism by showing Soviet life in a positive light. Artists and writers could criticize the bourgeoisie, past, or even... Artists and writers could criticize the bourgeoisie past, or even, to a limited degree, point out mistakes under communism. Their overall message, though, had to promote the hope of a communist future. Popular themes for socialist realist artists were peasant workers, heroes of the revolution, and, of course, Stalin. Censorship. Government controlled what books were published, what music was heard, and which works of art were displayed. Artists who ignored communist guidelines could not get materials, workspace, or jobs. Under Stalin, totalitarian policies, writers, artists, and composers faced government persecution. The Jewish poet Osip Mandelstam, for example, was imprisoned, tortured, and exiled for composing a satirical verse that was critical of Stalin. Out of fear for his wife's safety, Mandelstam finally submitted to the threats and wrote the Ode to Stalin. Boris Pasternak, who would later win fame as for his novel Dr. Zhivago, was afraid to publish anything at all during the Stalin years. Rather than write in favor of style of socialist realism, he became a translator of literary works. Anna Akhmatova, one of Russia's greatest poets, could not publish her works because she had violated state guidelines. Still, she wrote secretly in Requiem. She described the ordeal of trying to visit her 20-year-old son imprisoned during the Stalinist terrors. I'm just going to read it normal. I don't know how to do a female Russian accent. I don't know how to do a Russian accent at all. For 17 long months, my pleas, my cries have called you home. I've begged the hangman on my knees, my son, my dream, my own. My mind's mixed up for good, and I'm no longer even clear. Who's man, who's beast, nor how much time before the end draws near. Anna Akhmatova, Requiem. Despite restrictions, some Soviet writers produced magnificent works, and Quiet Flowers of the Dawn by Mikhail Sholokov passed the censor. The novel tells the story of a man who spends years fighting in World War I, the Russian Revolution and the Civil War. Sholokov later became one of the few Soviet writers to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. Looking ahead, and this will be the end of the chapter and the end of our time today. Thank you. By the time Stalin died in 1953, the Soviet Union had become a military superpower and the world leader in heavy industry. Yet Stalin's efforts exacted a brutal toll. The Soviet people were dominated by a totalitarian system based on terror. Most people in the Soviet Union lived meager lives compared with people in the West. The Soviet Union was not the only totalitarian state to emerge in the decades after World War I. As you will read, in the 1920s and 1930s, dictators arose in Italy and Germany. They too created a one-party state and cults of personality to impose dictatorial rule on their people. God bless. God bless. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. And bye-bye.